In November 1988, in a Soviet apartment block in Voronezh, a woman named Lyudmila walked 5 blocks home. In the cold, carrying a canvas sack of potatoes she had spent 3 hours in line to buy. The sack weighed about 10 kilograms, roughly 22 pounds. The state food store had been almost empty when she got there. No meat, no cheese, no bread, until a truck arrived at noon. But there had been potatoes. She fed her family of 4 on that sack for 30 days. This is not a story about poverty. It is a story about a knowledge system. Lyudmila was not improvising. She was executing a method passed down to her by her mother, who had learned it from her own mother during the famine years of the 1930s, who had learned it from village women who had been doing it since before the Bolshevik Revolution. In late Soviet households, particularly in the shortage years between 1985 and 1991, an entire underground economy of food knowledge kept families fed in conditions that would collapse a modern American kitchen inside 3 days. The state stores were empty. The kitchens of Soviet families were not. There is a particular skill, possessed mostly by Russian women born before 1970, of looking at one potato and seeing the next 2 weeks of meals. Modern American families throw away roughly 30% of the food they purchase, according to USDA Economic Research Service estimates. The Soviet family in 1988 threw away nothing. Not the peel, not the sprout, not the water the potato boiled in, not the starch that settled at the bottom of that water overnight. Everything went somewhere. Everything became something else. This video is about exactly how they did it. If you are new here, this channel preserves the survival knowledge the modern world erased. Subscribe so YouTube actually shows you the rest of the series. To understand the system, you have to understand the conditions. The late Soviet Union, particularly during the perestroika years from 1985 to 1991, suffered severe food distribution failures. This is not propaganda. It is documented in Soviet state records, in Western diplomatic cables, and in dozens of memoirs published after 1991. Anya von Bremzen, in her 2013 book, Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking, describes the shortage years with the bitter precision of someone who lived through them. Dara Goldstein, the food historian who edited the journal Gastronomica for 2 decades, documents the same period in her 2020 book, Beyond the North Wind. What was in the state stores varied by month, by city, and by the political winds of the moment. What was in the dachas, the small country garden plots owned by roughly 60% of Soviet families, was potatoes, cabbage, carrots, beets, pickled mushrooms, salted cucumbers, and more potatoes. Russian per capita potato consumption in 1985 was approximately 109 kilograms per year, according to Soviet Central Statistical Bureau figures. That number is roughly 4 times the per capita potato consumption of the United States today. The dacha was not a luxury cottage. The Soviet dacha was a small wooden building on 600 square meters of state-allocated land, typically an hour or 2 outside the city by suburban train. Families spent every weekend from April to October there, planting potatoes in late spring, weeding through summer, harvesting in September, and hauling sacks of root vegetables back to the apartment on overcrowded trains. Melissa Caldwell, an anthropologist at UC Santa Cruz, spent years documenting this system in her 2010 book, Dacha Idols. She estimated that even in the post-Soviet era, dacha gardens produced roughly 40% of the potatoes, vegetables, and berries consumed by Russian households. Alongside the dacha was the second system that kept Soviet families alive. Blati. Blat is a Russian word with no clean English translation. It means, roughly, the informal network of favors and personal connections that allowed Soviet citizens to obtain goods the state stores did not have. a friend who worked at a meat distribution warehouse, a neighbor whose cousin drove a delivery truck, a co-worker whose husband knew someone at the dairy. Blat was illegal. Blat was universal. The 1985 to 1991 shortage years made blat essential. A bag of potatoes from a state store fed your family for 30 days. A jar of canned beef obtained through blat made one of those 30 days remarkable. The potato was not a side dish in Soviet cooking. It was the core caloric strategy of an entire civilization. Here is how one 10-kilogram sack became 30 days. In the first 3 days, the potato was eaten in its most direct forms, boiled in salted water and served with butter, dill, and pickled herring on day 1. Fried in sunflower oil with onions on day 2. On day 3, half the remaining potatoes went into a soup. But this is where the system already diverged from a modern American kitchen. Lyudmila did not peel and discard. She peeled and saved. The peels went into a separate pot, boiled with onion, bay leaf, and a fragment of garlic. The peels produced a stock that became the base of the soup itself. The potatoes inside the soup were the body. The peels were the flavor. Modern restaurant cooks call this technique a vegetable consommé. Russian babushkas have been doing it since before Napoleon invaded Moscow. If you are following so far, drop the word potato in the comments so we know. In days 4 through 10, the remaining potatoes shifted form. Boiled potatoes from earlier meals became draniki, Russian potato pancakes. Grated raw potato mixed with egg and a spoon of flour, fried in oil until the edges crisped. Mashed potato leftovers became kartoffelnie kotlety, Russian potato cutlets, formed into small ovals around a piece of onion or mushroom and pan-fried. Drachina, the Belarusian and Russian potato egg bake, used 3 potatoes and 2 eggs to feed an entire family. The official Soviet cookbook, Kniga o Vkusnoi i Zdorovoi Pishche, translated as The Book of Tasty and Healthy Food, first published by the Soviet Ministry of Food Industry in 1939 and reprinted continuously through 1990, contains dozens of recipes specifically designed to maximize a small potato yield. The 1952 edition alone runs to over 400 pages, and the potato section is one of the longest in the book. By day 11, the potatoes had transformed again. This was the pierogi week. Pierogi are Russian-filled pastries, a thin flour dough wrapped around a filling and either baked or boiled. The traditional filling for shortage-era pierogi was simple: cooked potato, fried onion, a pinch of dill, salt, and pepper. A single potato could fill 4 pierogi. 4 pierogi fed 1 person. Lyudmila made 40 pierogi on a Sunday afternoon, using 6 potatoes, 1 onion, 2 cups of flour, water, and salt. Those 40 pierogi fed her family for 2 more days, with the leftover pierogi packed cold into work and school lunches the following morning. What is not visible in any list of the dishes themselves is the system of preserves that traveled alongside the potato throughout the month. Every Soviet apartment kitchen had a shelf, or several, lined with 3-liter glass jars. Inside those jars were the products of the previous autumn. Salted cabbage, fermented for weeks until it turned tangy and almost effervescent. Salted cucumbers with dill and horseradish leaves. Pickled tomatoes. Marinated mushrooms gathered from the forests around the dacha in August and September. Dried mushrooms strung on threads. Jars of berry preserves and dried apple slices. The potatoes were the body of every meal, but the preserves were the seasoning, the acid, the salt, the variety that kept 30 days of potatoes from becoming intolerable. A boiled potato is one thing. A boiled potato with a fork of salted cabbage, a slice of pickled cucumber, and a few marinated honey mushrooms is a meal that has been refined over 800 years of Russian peasant cuisine. By day 16, the system entered its more sophisticated phase. The remaining potatoes were now smaller, beginning to sprout, no longer ideal for direct eating, so they were transformed. Grated raw, soaked in cold water, and left overnight, the starch settled at the bottom of the bowl. The next morning, the water was poured off, but not discarded. That water was fermented for 2 days with a spoon of rye flour and became potato kvass, a slightly tangy drink Russian peasants had been making for 3 centuries. The starch at the bottom of the bowl was dried on a piece of muslin cloth and stored. That starch became thickener for kissel, the Russian fruit pudding, and for soups for the rest of the winter. The leftover grated potato pulp after the starch had been extracted was not thrown away either. It was salted, drained, and pan-fried into crispy little fritters that Russian children fought over. Drop a like if this is changing how you think about food. YouTube pays attention to that. In days 21 through 25, the potatoes were stretched into combined dishes. This is where the Soviet shortage cook earned her real reputation. Vinaigrette, the Russian beet salad, used 3 small boiled potatoes, 3 boiled beets, 3 boiled carrots, a small jar of salted cucumbers, and a tin of canned peas if available. The dish fed 4 people for 2 meals. Salat. Olivier, the Russian potato salad that became a worldwide diaspora staple, required 4 potatoes, 3 eggs, a small piece of bologna or canned tuna, 2 pickles, and a spoon of mayonnaise. 1 large bowl fed the family for 2 days. The Olivier of 1988 was not the Olivier of Tsarist Moscow restaurants. That version had veal tongue and crayfish. The 1988 version was what was left after 70 years of substitutions, and it tasted better than it had any right to. By day 26, almost no whole potatoes remained. What remained was scraps. And this is where the system becomes most distinctive. The smallest leftover potato pieces were dried on top of the Russian stove, on a tray, over 3 days. Once thoroughly dried, they kept indefinitely in a paper sack. Russian peasants had been drying potatoes this way since the 1800s. The dried potato pieces could be ground into a coarse flour and added to bread, used as a soup thickener, or rehydrated and reconstituted into a kind of hash for breakfast. The Bashkortostan and Tatar villages of the southern Urals used a similar drying method documented in William Pokliobkin's foundational work from 1978, National Cuisines of Our Peoples, the most thorough Russian culinary ethnography text ever written. By day 30, what remained of the original 10-kilogram sack was a small handful of sprouted potato eyes, a few skins, and roughly a cup of dried potato dust. The sprouted eyes went into a paper bag, kept cool, and were planted in the dacha garden in April for next year's harvest. The skins were composted. The dust was sifted into the next week's bread dough. The sack itself was washed, folded, and placed in a drawer to be reused for the next month's shopping. The bread is worth pausing on. Soviet households did not buy white bread for daily eating. They bought it when they could find it and ate it fresh. The bread that sustained the family was dark rye, sometimes baked at home, sometimes purchased from a state bakery that produced loaves so dense they could be used as a hammer in an emergency. Adding potato dust to the rye flour stretched the bread by perhaps 15%, gave it a softer crumb, and used the last fragment of the original 10-kilogram sack. There is a Russian saying, "Bread is the head of everything." By the time the bread came out of the oven, the potato had been the head of everything for a month. Nothing was thrown away. Not because Lyudmila was poor, though she was, but because throwing away food was, in the Soviet moral economy, simply not done. Pokliobkin describes the practice as moral discipline rather than mere thrift. Every part of every food had a place in the system. Anything else was negligence. William Pokliobkin himself is worth a moment of attention. He was a Soviet military historian by profession, a culinary scholar by obsession, and one of the most rigorous Russian food researchers of the 20th century. He spent decades cataloging the traditional cuisines of the 15 Soviet republics, traveling to villages, interviewing grandmothers, documenting methods that were already vanishing in the 1960s and the 1970s when he did the work. He was found murdered in his Moscow apartment in March 2000, the case officially unsolved. The books he left behind remain the definitive Russian language record of the food knowledge this video is trying to preserve. What modern American families call meal prep, the Soviet babushka called Tuesday. She did not call a nutritionist. She did not download an app. She started peeling. The United States Department of Agriculture estimates that the average American household throws away roughly 30% of all food purchased. That figure translates to approximately $2,500 per family per year, in 2024 dollars, according to Economic Research Service data. The same Soviet family in Lyudmila's Voronezh apartment block in 1988 threw away effectively zero food, ate caloric levels not radically different from the modern American family, and did it on a state ration system that delivered roughly 400 rubles a month, equivalent in purchasing power to about $200 at the time. The difference was not income. The difference was knowledge. The knowledge has not entirely vanished. It still exists in the apartment kitchens of Russian women over the age of 60, in the dacha networks that still feed roughly half of Russian households today, according to figures from the Russian Federal State Statistics Service, and in the oral traditions that survived the Soviet collapse. But it is thinning fast. Lyudmila's daughter, born in 1986, can do perhaps half of what her mother could. Her granddaughter, born in 2015, will do almost none of it. Within 2 more generations, this entire knowledge system will be effectively extinct from active practice. This channel exists to record it before it disappears. In the next video, we are going to look at how Russian babushkas healed wounds without antibiotics, using a system of birch tar, propolis, and a particular fermentation of honey that Soviet medical journals quietly admitted in the 1970s killed certain bacteria more effectively than the available pharmacy alternatives. If you want to see that one when it goes live, subscribe and turn on the bell so YouTube actually tells you it exists. Thank you for watching. If this taught you something you did not know, leave a like. It is the single biggest signal that tells YouTube to push this video to other people who care about real knowledge. Drop a comment with which method surprised you most: the peel stock, the dried potato bread, the starch extraction, the pierogi week, the potato kvass. We read every comment. Subscribe, like, comment. See you in the next one.